Hello, Sopranos Podcast fans. It's Chris D'Amato here. Please forgive my stuffed nose. I have COVID and I'm a little under the weather. But here is part 2 of our Season 3 retrospective. We hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for listening.
So, when it happened, guys, I did a little intro on the podcast, but I wanted to give you guys a chance, since this is our first recording since the death of Peter Bogdanovich. I wanted to give you guys a chance to just say anything you want to say about Peter Bogdanovich and Elliot Kupferberg, since he was unfortunately taken from us this past month.
Yeah.
Anything you want to say about him, Elliot, and his contribution to The Sopranos and film or whatever?
He was honestly, he's one of my favorite characters on The Sopranos that are in like that, outer supporting cast. You know, he's someone I always enjoy seeing because I think he's just on site so funny.
Yeah.
But also all of his scenes are really good. He lends a certain verisimilitude to like those scenes on the show because he's someone that seems so knowledgeable just both outside of the show and on the show. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. My memory about Bogdanovich, the first one is my dad telling me about this movie called The Last Picture Show when I was young, and seeing it. Very interesting movie. It was different. It's compelling. It's rich. It's nostalgic. And this young filmmaker at the time, Peter Bogdanovich, who made it, and some of his other work, including later on in season 5, I think, directing an episode of The Sopranos, bringing his own style to it. Mm-hmm. And hearing David Chase talk about him on this show was cool as well. The fact that he seems deliberately chosen because, not even because he's done some acting, but because his vibe is so the polar opposite of Melfi's quiet empathy. This character's a bit more removed, a bit more intellectual, a bit more aloof in some ways, but also very funny. I guess Bogdanovich brought the water bottle himself.
Yeah.
And he was like that, and David Chase said that was his thing, and it just clicked immediately. So, and I agree with Jordan, like, without even necessarily too much screen time overall, he really made a dent in the show and made huge contributions to movies and worked with a ton of interesting people. So he will be missed.
Yeah, I'll miss him and his beautiful basset hound face and all of the great work he did. His scenes with Melfi are always really good.
Yeah,
and
he rules.
No spoilers, but he's got a lot of great shit coming in the show too. So thank you, Peter. Thank you, Elliot. Moving along here, I want to talk about Uncle Junior this season and the interesting direction they took with him. And on a grand glance, if you're looking at specific plot points and story beats, it almost may look like Junior's storyline this season was an excursion, in a sense, because he's a primary antagonist at the tail end of his prime here in season 1. He's made boss, but very briefly there to take the lightning rods, and there to be a lightning rod and to take the hits, and he gets indicted. Season 2, we deal with the fallout of that war and his legal troubles, the house arrest, and the impending issue with Richie, and is he going to waffle again and side with Richie, or is he going to stick with Tony? He sticks with Tony. The trial should be coming up, and he gets this cancer diagnosis. But the more I thought about it, the less it feels like an excursion and more a great way to explore this character, because first and foremost, Junior's primary concern and challenge is this is a character trying to hold on to his dignity.
Yeah.
And cancer is one of those things. Anyone who's experienced someone who has had it or who has had it themselves understands that it is a process that is riddled with indignity and struggle. Mm-hmm. It's a tough thing. And to see this hardened gangster this late in his life, at this point, go through this is great character development for Junior. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed watching the stuff around it. I enjoyed seeing Tony with Dr. Kennedy and that whole situation. Tony get to use his gangster cunning for heroics. So, thoughts on Junior's journey in season 3?
It's an interesting one. I think that in some way it's pulling back even more than season 2 did, because in season 2 there was at least still a thread where he was connected to Richie, to a possible route back to power or something like it.
Yeah.
Here it's dealing much more, I think, again, with that indignity and certainly his becoming ill which brings up a couple things. It makes him more, in some ways, even more ridiculous. Because in Another Toothpick, his behavior is just completely insane. And it makes him more legit vulnerable. He is in pain. He's scared that he could die. The whole thing. This also brings out something else in Tony, where in spite of everything they've been through, Tony insists that he be shown respect when he's with the doctor. He wants to look after him. There's also a couple of beats, they're short, but where I think we see them, and it seems, again, entirely conscious and deliberate, where Tony and Junior are more functionally aligned. Could just be something small, like in Pine Barrens, I need you to get Bobby Bacala on the phone, I'm going to come over to your house, we're going to meet up. There we just see Tony and Junior operating together, and when Bacala bucks a little bit at the whole thing, Junior just says, go with my nephew, do what he says. There's a couple beats like that, where it seems like Junior, again, the future may hold something different, but things have evened out a touch between he and Tony. And now the end of the season sets up his going forward, the trial is coming up.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I have much to add other than that, this is Junior at the most diminished we've seen him. I mean, cancer diagnosis brings him so low. And I think Dominic Chianese is just an amazing actor and really sells those moments in a beautiful, painful way. And also, Junior has this lovely moment right at the end of our season. It's a great moment where he is singing and everyone is watching him sing. And this is like his song where he's going to try to celebrate what remains of his life. And that's a brave choice to live that way. And I hope he gets to do that. I've said this on the show a couple times. I don't have a great memory for what happens next on the show. I don't really know what happens to Junior. I want good things for him, which really speaks to this character's development, because early in the show I was like, fuck Junior, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, exactly. He's a great character. He's one of my favorite characters. And speaking of favorite characters, I think it's time for another top three.
Top three.
They're getting better. We have to juggle this up next
We got to
time.
dial it back.
Yeah. These are actually getting somewhat listened. I'm sure the people listening are there like, no, it's not. It's not getting better. We hate it.
Right.
Great.
Right.
Characters and performances. I'll start us off.
Sure.
I have an honorable mention.
Yep.
Aaron Arkaway.
Yes.
I had to mention it's a small role.
You love him. You love
small
him.
role scheme of thing, but I do love this character.
Love him.
He's so goofy and funny, and the idea of pairing Janice up with this guy especially, it's just so funny. I don't know how they conceptualized that, but it's so good. And it's a great mother jumping lyric, Jan. He's just so perfect on that. His awkward posture, the fact that he has narcoleptic too, like making him a awkward looking born again Christian guy wouldn't have been enough. He's got to be narcoleptic too, and just pass out on the couch. And at the dinner table,
he's very funny.
He is risen.
Well, and I mean, he's also a fanatic, but he's so pleasant.
Yeah.
It's so... If he were sort of like in your face with it in a different way, it would not be funny or ironic.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. He's just a very pleasant guy. And I went into the explanation on that because I have a feeling he's not on any of your lists. But with that said, I'm going to begin my official list. We're going to give our numbers and then go into the explanations after, because this may have some crossovers. So, with that said, my number 3 is Joe Pantoliano as Ralph Cifaretto.
Very nice. My honorable mention is for Michael Imperioli as Christopher, who I feel like he either makes my top 3 every season, or he's just on the honorable mentions list. So this is a guy I'm just always interested in. Christopher. I think he's a great character. I think he provides some of the show's best moments, which I'll talk about. But my number 3 is also Ralph Cifaretto.
Cool. All right. 3 honorable mentions, really quick. Edie Falco as Carmela Soprano. Michael Imperioli as Christopher Moltisanti. Chris has not made any of my lists. I want to talk about why. And Jamie Lynn Siegler as Meadow Soprano. We'll come back to that. And my number 3 performance, Lorraine Bracco, Jennifer Melfi.
Mm-hmm.
My number 2 is Edie Falco as Carmela.
My number 2 is Annabella Sciorra as Gloria.
My number 2 is Joey Pantoliano as Ralph Cifaretto.
My number 1, Lorraine Bracco, Dr. Melfi.
Number 1, Lorraine Bracco, Dr. Melfi.
Number 1, Gloria Trillo. Annabella Sciorra.
All right, so we're dealing with the same couple here.
Yeah.
We all repeated basically the same ones.
Yep.
Why don't we start with the only one that was not shared, which I think was Edie Falco.
Sure. Well,
Right.
he had an honorable mention, Edie Falco, right? And I.
Oh, no,
she
I'm
was-
sorry. Okay.
She was actually
Let's
on
start
my
with Edie
list.
Falco.
Yeah. I love Edie Falco's journey this season. It's different. It's so understated because she's kind of... A lot of the times in the previous 2 seasons, we've seen her in relation to Tony. Or in relation to other familiar characters like Father Phil or the kids. What I like about season 3 is she starts off adjacent to Tony. And her beginning of the season is relatively quiet compared to previous seasons. And you're wondering what's going on with this woman. They reconciled as best they could at the end of 2 with the whole arena thing coming up and the fight they had there. And her journey is her own journey this season. She's seeing people we've never seen before. She's going to therapists. She's wondering what her future is. And Edie Falco just brings such a lovely... She has had more present seasons, and by present I mean screen time and intensity, than this season. And she's going to have more explosive and interesting on a big surface level seasons. But because Edie made so much of this personal journey Carmela goes on this season, I couldn't help but be in awe of it.
Sure.
So that's why I selected her. Her acting through the many different scenes she has with Dr. Krakauer and then with the new priest in Amour Fou, the way she has this continuing relationship with Tony where he's buying her good graces, but she is wondering how she can live outside of that. It's just really good, and Edie does such a powerful job in every moment she's in. Her crying at the museum at that photo, at that painting, is just incredible work. She's always incredible, remarkable. I love Edie Falco. She hasn't made any of my lists yet, so I had to do her for this one.
Yeah, I feel like we always exempt Tony from these lists because obviously he would be everyone's number 1 because he's the fulcrum. But I always feel like Edie is like the unspoken number 2.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like she's always like it would be the 2 of them. So in a way, I didn't put her on my honorable mentions list, but like she, it's obvious to me. I'm always into whatever's going on with Carmela. I think she's wonderful.
I can't put it any better than what you guys framed out for Carmela. I'll say briefly in my honorable mentions, I chose Michael Imperioli for an honorable mention for Chris, particularly because even though Chris still has some goofy, funny moments, I think this season starts to center him in a slightly different way, where the character has evened out a bit. Like, for example, when Pine Barrens comes around, he's really just along for the ride. Paulie's the one who fucks that up.
Yeah.
And another moment that was close to making my moments list is at the end of Amour Fou when Albert and Chris just cruelly and coldly execute Dino. It was like, dude, Christopher ain't floundering anymore. He's not like, oh, is this for me? He's a gangster.
Yep.
This is the
days of D-Girl are long behind. Yeah.
Well, see, that's really well said. So that's why I chose that to recognize what Imperioli's doing. And I chose the honorable mention for Jamie Lynn Sigler for Meadow because of what she does throughout the season, particularly in Army of One.
Yeah. Chris is interesting to me because he might be, in totality, my favorite character other than Tony in the whole show. If I had to pick one, gun on me. Michael Imperioli as Christopher might be the name that comes out of my mouth most likely, right? But he hasn't made any of my lists either yet, and I'm wondering why that is.
Right. I mean, I care about so many characters on this show, but like I'm always like doing a welfare check with 3 characters in particular. It's always like, okay, what's going on with Tony? How's he doing? How's he going to deal with this? Carmela, how's she doing? What's going to happen next? And Christopher.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 for me, and that's not to discount Meadow or AJ in any way, but it's always those 3. I always feel are like the ones where I'm like, in my head, I'm like, that's the family to me.
Yeah.
And Christopher's been there since the beginning, and we know that he's a surrogate son. Like, one of the first sequences that happens is Chris picking Tony up. So I think that him seeing to this mob kid is a big part of the show.
Yeah. And this is the first season where Chris is operating, as you said, as a made guy, and I think it's it's actually amazing to watch his arc from season 1 to now. I wouldn't say he's had the most growth, but he's had very obvious growth.
Yeah.
And we see, as we've said on the show many times, so many young men fail. And it's how old and mature and even kind of cool Christopher looks when you compare him to Jackie, when you compare him to Dino, when you compare him to, whoever else, other young men, Matt and Sean, fucking whatever,
It's funny, he has had a great journey. In season 1, he basically is the young douchebag character. He makes it out by the skin of his neck in the graces of Livia and Junior Soprano. But Brendan, doesn't make it out a lot and doesn't make it
Brendan
out all right.
Filone. Oh boy.
Brendan Filone. And then season 2, he's a mentor to the new douchebag characters, but still among them. He's like the leader.
Right.
He's like he's the leader of the
He's
shit
the
class.
oldest kid at the kids' table.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
And he falls prey to them, unfortunately. And then in season 3, there's a maturity and a
Right.
distance.
He's just gotten to the adults' table.
Yeah, exactly.
He'll stop by the kids' table to pick up some mac and cheese. Then he's going back.
Yeah, he'll check in at the Ufa Pizzeria, but then decide, I really can't be seen in a place like this anymore.
Also, the subtle change in costuming, very nice. He dresses like an adult now.
Yep. And when he was desperate, he included Jackie in his plans, but he does distance himself from Jackie. He sees it. He knows this pattern, and he's mature enough now to say, I'm not doing this
Sure.
Matt Bevilacqua shit again.
Yep. Well, one of his great scenes is with Jackie at the Bing.
Yeah.
Where he delineates, what's the difference between a sit down and what's the other thing he says?
Chat.
A sit down and a chat, and then Jackie gets so nervous by the appearance of Tony that he runs out the emergency door, and we're left looking like Christopher seems very powerful in that moment. He's sitting at the bar, he wants to be left alone. Get the fuck away from me. You know?
Yep.
Are they really that different in age? No, probably 5 to 7 years separates them, but there's a huge gap in maturity.
Yeah.
Chris by then is effectively running that club.
Right.
So we see that his power and responsibility has become greater. It's important. He knows that the ecstasy stuff is federal territory. Yeah, it's a big arc. Mm-hmm. You know who had an arc?
Noah.
No.
Noah Tenenbaum. He had an arc.
Yeah, he sure did.
We talked at length already about Ralph. He was my number 3. We don't need to
I don't know
double
that we
down
need to
too
go.
much
We
on it.
already did a lot of Ralph.
But self-explanatory why he would be
Yeah,
on.
great
He
performance.
was my number 3. Was he on anyone else's?
He was my number 2.
Your number 2.
My number 2.
No, I'm sorry. He was my number 3. You're number 2.
Yep. So Jordan and I shared number 3. He was on your number 2, Paul. Great. And then we had, I believe, we talked about Carmela was my number 2. Who was your number 2?
So our shared number 2, you and mine, Chris, is Gloria, and it's Paul's number 1.
No, my number 2 was Carmela. I think you and you shared Gloria. Gloria's not on my list.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so Gloria's your number 1, and Gloria's my number 2.
Yeah.
Okay. So we got to talk about Melfi and Gloria then.
Okay. Which first?
Doesn't matter. Let's say Gloria.
Let's do Gloria.
Yeah, let's do Gloria. I'll let you guys talk about her more because she's on your list.
This
but-
is Paul's number 1, so
Yeah.
let's let Paul lead.
Yeah. Well, Paul, you can lead this one, but I just want to say, from an acting standpoint, you get the call from your agent. You're up for something on The Sopranos. Oh my God! There's immediate gravitas. There's immediate, probably some nerves in the audition.
Number 1 show
room.
on TV. Big
Yeah,
deal. Big deal. Yeah.
And it's a regular thing. You're going to be working with James Gandolfini. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And then you actually realize and have discussions about what the character is, and you realize whose shoes you're here to fill.
Yeah.
And Annabella Sciorra not only made it her own, but fucking rose to the occasion in a big way. So she deserves to be on this. She's not on my list just because. How can you?
Because
pick
you're
3?
a fuck, Chris. How could you? What the hell?
How can you pick 3? But I just wanted, for my piece on Gloria, and then I'm going to give it to Paul, what shoes to fill, just from an acting perspective, to come in and have to fill the Livia hole this season? Good God. Take it away.
Well said. Gloria Trillo is part of this storyline that's so meaningful to me. It's one of my favorites on the show. This might be my favorite one-off character who comes in, does these guest spots. It's different for the show. It filled this void, it seemed, with Livia being out because Nancy Marchand had died. The other thing is that the show has never been this sexy. When the closest that it comes, sorry, D-Girl, just not the same. That storyline's too goofy anyway to rise to this level, because this is sexy, and sexy then dangerous is also something we're dealing with in this season, just like sex and meat. So there's those dynamics where it's the closest that the show has come to being this sexy is when Tony was dreaming of Melfi in season 1.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then for it to switch, for it to slowly turn these gears, and for the audience to be, as we've said on the podcast, a bit ahead of Tony, like, oh, this doesn't feel right, but Tony's still so in love, seeing
His
her
head in the
through
clouds.
through rose-colored glasses. I wanted to pose this question to you guys about Gloria.
Yeah.
Is part of why he didn't see this, in fact, because he met her in therapy and identifies her with Melfi?
Oh, interesting.
That
That's
he
a
actually
fascinating take.
that he thinks of her as kind of straight and even as a woman because he met her in this scenario where she showed this class and dignity and sexy legs and all that, and the other things that she has in common with Melfi. And anyway, all this comes together. The character turns out to be unstable. I do think she's dangerous, and yet the fact that I still felt for her, I felt bad for her, and was so troubled by the scene with her and Tony, and then of course her scene with Patsy, is a tribute to what Shiora did with the role. So that's why I chose it.
I think Tony does mention at several points some of the things he appreciates about her. Obviously, Annabelle Shiora is a beautiful woman.
Yes.
So straight up, she's just a gorgeous to look at, and I think that is what catches his eye first. Paul, I don't disagree. I think meeting her in therapy was important to Tony because that is a space that is sort of uniquely his, and I think that he has almost like a sense of like she's independent of his worlds. Right? She doesn't come from his family home life. She doesn't come from his family life. She's something new for him, and that's kind of cool. And I think there's an extent where, he sees a little bit of himself in her, right? She's independent. She makes her own money. She takes care of herself. But like him, she's also really unstable and really dangerous, but she has no support system. We always forget this, and we're a little neglectful of it. I don't mean on this podcast. I mean like the viewer. Is that no matter how volatile Tony can be, and no matter how much his world gets out of whack, like, Tony has people that deeply love and care about him, even as much as he is cruel to others, or violent towards others, or is callous of others. Carmela really loves him. Tony's children really love him. He has really good friends that would die for him. Gloria has none of those things. Yeah. Gloria is alone. And that is the source of all of her hurt, is that she doesn't have a family of her own. She's not made a family for herself. She doesn't seem to have good friends. We know for a fact she has terrible romantic relationships that she feels she is responsible for ruining. She might be the show's saddest character at this point. I have rarely felt for anyone in the show as much as I felt for her.
Yeah. We couldn't talk about it until it manifested itself, but her task this season is suicide by gangster. There's no other way to word it.
Yeah.
She sees this, and as Melfi describes it so articulately in therapy, there are certain people drawn to danger like a moth to a flame, looking for an inevitable result. That's it. She sees this guy. Tony has his charms, and there's a sexiness and alpha male quality, but there was no illusion about who this guy was, and that was exactly what she was going for. It's sad. It's deeply sad. It's very upsetting.
Well said. And there's every illusion about who she is.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, well done to convey all of that in the way that she did, and also to be simultaneously pitiful and dangerous is an interesting thing to watch. It's an interesting thing to absorb, and to go from sobbing uncontrollably on the telephone to get Tony to come over versus the Gloria we saw on the car ride with Carmela screeching down the icy New Jersey landscape.
Yes, one of the best moments in the show, yes.
So good. So yeah, that's
then also
Gloria.
playing the sexiness, like the reptile house scene, or like any time with them in bed. Very sexy, really.
Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah, legitimately. I don't know, this is like such like guy stuff here, but like, I don't know, her like on her knees in front of him smiling while she grabs the gun. It's like, ooh, this is dangerous.
Oh yeah, no, she's beautiful. She's meant to entice. It's great. I mean, I get it.
And then we have Dr. Melfi, which was my number one pick.
Also my number one. Yeah.
What can you really say about her? She could be on the top. Another character that could be on every top 3 list.
She frequently makes our top lists. I mean, it's hard.
But this is her season to me as far as standout performances. We know who this woman is in the way she interacts with Tony in the first 2 seasons, but we see what we know put to the strongest test in this season with what she goes through in Employee of the Month and how she responds to it. And she gives Melfi this strained vulnerability, and yet that she maintains her poise and morals and dignity and makes the choice that a Tony Soprano never could.
Yeah.
And shows restraint. And not only restraint, but keeps up with the mission. When she makes that decision, it's done. There's no second guessing. There's no hemming and hawing. She gets back to the task of treating her patient.
Yeah.
Fucking just so good. Just so good. And Lorraine Bracco is a queen and a half.
Yeah, just to talk about the actor for a second. We've all been performers in our time. Chris is a professional actor, of course. I don't think there's a harder ask of an actor than you're performing a rape scene. You are going to be raped in this scene. And not only are you going to be raped in the scene, it's going to be the most realistic depiction of rape, like, ever on television, to the point where it's, like, nauseating for the viewer, where it's difficult for us to even talk about it. That's amazing work. It's a really good scene. She does it really well. It's depicted well. And Lily had really good insights on this in our episode on Employee of the Month, but it made it important. Like, they really made this something that we were all forced to reckon with. It really made you check in with when these things happen, and otherwise, Chris, I can't really do better for the character. I think, it makes us respect her so much and feel for her so much.
Yeah. I think the season would have been fairly distinctive for her, even if Employee of the Month hadn't happened.
Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, because I think for a very simple reason, which is that at the end of season 2, she came clean with Tony in this respect, that she had been afraid of him. And then, I think in particular after his mother died, she pushed him more. And they found more. Hence these really interesting scenes like in Fortunate Son, teasing out what happened and what it means and how this is affecting your life now. Bringing Carmela in. The scene where she has the one scene that's only with Carmela. Scenes with Elliot discussing what happened with the rape, of course.
Yes.
And the episode itself, Employee of the Month, puts it at another level. As always, as you guys put it, she hits every mark. She's great. So I can't say much more. And yeah, Employee of the Month was definitely important in what it depicted and how much more respect, or the elevation of that respect for the character and her dignity and her poise, than I had before. So,
all agreed. I want to use that as a segue into our next discussion topic before we go to our next top 3 in just a minute here. I always like to do this in our retrospective because we just had a great conversation about Melfi's emotional and character journey in this episode.
Yeah.
But let's touch down on the therapy itself. Tony's journey as a patient, Melfi's journey as a doctor, and how we think the therapy itself is going at this now halfway point in the series. Because it's been a hell of a journey for them up to this point. How do we think it's going? Is this a successful therapy experience? Are we getting somewhere with Tony?
Carmela doesn't seem to think so.
No. And honestly, the way he reacts anytime therapy comes up for other people, I think that Tony still holds a deep underlying cynicism about the process.
For sure.
Yet, Melfi does step it up when asked to do so. And yes, she had to get over her hurdle after the events of season 1 and season 2 of being afraid of him. But now the work is really getting in, and she takes that initiative with the episode Fortunate Son and going back to the meat and really tackling a potential root cause of the panic attacks. And I don't have anxiety attacks, but I have some other issues that I was recently dealing with in therapy that my therapist talked me through some root causes, some initial things that sparked issues that I deal with. And that understanding does actually help in dealing with present issues. If you understand where something comes from, you are easily able to identify triggers. And having just gone through something similar in therapy because of this, it's like, wow, she's doing a great job here. Is it all for naught? How are we feeling about this?
In many ways, I actually thought this was one of the more successful times in the show for therapy.
Yeah.
I thought the therapy sessions went well. She kind of got her spark back in terms of getting Tony on a track. Yeah, Carmela is dissatisfied with maybe the fact that Tony is still having panic attacks, but more importantly, Melfi got her there. Yeah. And now Melfi has a better idea of what this marriage is and the things that might be preying upon Tony and affecting Tony. And ultimately, Melfi seems to be able to guide Tony to open up a bit more this season. There are fewer shutdowns this season than there have been previously. He's been talking more.
Well, in season 2's thing was the therapy went nowhere. Every episode they stonewalled, they flatlined, and Tony, they just both left flustered and flummoxed.
Sure. And also, again, thematically, this is a season about Tony as a father. He is able to talk about his children more easily than he's able to talk about himself.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of conversation being had there about him being uncertain about what to do with Meadow, what to do with AJ. And he does bring up a lot of things he is distressed about authentically in therapy, even if he has to disguise like Tracy's death as a work accident or something like that. Like he is opening up as best he can. It's a pretty successful season for therapy, yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly more successful than last season. And last season they were both kind of decompensating.
Yeah.
So now I think the one step forward, two steps back thing is mostly about Tony. Whatever he can share, whatever he's willing to share, whatever he's willing to admit to himself. Like Amor Fu, for example, has them digging in on some serious stuff and probably doing some good work. But also part of what they're exploring is Tony's self-sabotage.
Sure.
Carmela, excuse me. Melfi has a frankness in that scene. Anthony, you'll never leave your wife, which I always liked.
She may leave you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Some people didn't like it, but I've been in therapy for a little while, and you do develop a shorthand.
Yeah.
And people do understand each other. So a certain amount of transference always happens. Transference is not a bad word. So I think, I think I'd agree that there's, it's complicated, but something is happening here. But I guess also the question of how therapy's going does bring up for me, what does this all mean and where is it going? Because it doesn't seem like a leap. It's an ethical breach. It's an ethical question that you might muddy the waters. But if Tony really wants to get better psychologically, maybe he shouldn't fucking do this for a living. Right?
Well, that's it.
Right.
That's it. But Melfi's not just going to come out and say that. That's not part of her judgmental. That's not part of her non-judgmental format. So we're getting somewhere. Where are we going?
Right. Yeah. And in therapy, they are really. He's able to nicely deconstruct with Melfi what's going on with Gloria and that relationship, both before and after it fizzles.
I do want to mention, because we've been complimentary of the therapy and generally positive in its direction this season, they seem to be not only back on track, but actually maybe getting somewhere. If the show just stopped here and they canceled it, I would think in my head, you know what, there's a chance if that show kept going, maybe Tony's going to get better.
Right.
So we'll see where that goes. I do want to point out, though, a tactical flaw that, or a byproduct of what's going on here, and I can't get into it fully at this point in time. I think there will be a moment later in the series that this discussion can be more realized. But we mentioned in our episode when it came up, and I'm forgetting exactly which episode it was, but people who are familiar with the show and watched it will remember this. In season 2, Melfi tells Tony when they resume their therapy, "You want to be a better gang leader, read The Art of War by Sun Tzu," implying that that's not what she's aiming to do in therapy. And at some point in the season, Tony comes back. He's read it. She gave him that advice.
Yeah. And
he read Art of War by Sun Tzu and quotes it back at her. So I just want to throw that out there, that there may be some unintended blowback by treating a gangster. And that may be something that is an issue with this therapy that we should keep an eye on. So, something to keep in mind. Moving along here, one last thing I wanted to talk about is the gangster guys. And I want to throw these names out and just touch down on them briefly, because they're supporting characters and there's things to be said about them. But let's talk about Paulie, Silvio, and Big Pussy. I love what they did with Big Pussy. How he's dead, but he's not going away. You know what I mean? He is haunting the show, literally. We saw his ghost in Proshailavushka. It's not something that Tony is just able to tuck away and compartmentalize. It's there. He's physically there.
Yeah.
In some way. And I love that they did that.
Oh, who do you want to start with of the three?
Let's start with Pussy.
Sure. To Save Us All from Satan's Power, I believe, is our Christmas episode.
Yeah.
Meadow gifts her father with a big mouth Billy Bass.
Yeah.
Right? And in many ways, he's still confronting his feelings about his old friend. It's a great scene. It's a great moment. I was even considering it for like a great moments, section. Yeah, I love that when a character dies on this show, they don't really go away, because that is very lifelike.
Yeah.
Right? That is, it honors that character, and it just like, it perpetuates the legacy of that character in a really cool way.
I agree. I think, and it's fun when he comes back. I think there is sentiment around it, but the show is not sentimental. Of course, instead of like, I think, it's got a bit, we mentioned this when we recorded, that on To Save Us All from Satan's Power, there's clearly a Ghost of Christmas Past kind of vibe.
Yeah.
But instead of showing you what used to be your innocence, it's like showing you that pussy was guilty all along.
Yeah. Right.
And
right, even in the flashback segment.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like it's brutal in that way. But then, of course, the wonderful irony that in those flashbacks also show you how great Big Pussy was as Santa, and then it dissolves back into the current day with Bobby as a failed Santa.
Yeah.
So I just love that vibe. I agree, and I also love that brief shot in Pro Shai Labushka.
It's great. I love it.
In the hallway.
It's just right.
Yeah. Silvio, touch on him quickly. He is Tony's stalwart, his consigliere, his advisor, his level-headed guy. Silvio holds steady this season in that regard, but what stands out to me about Silvio in this season, the takeaway for me when I think of Silvio in season 3, is the other side. We saw the other side of him that has been hidden from us, and is
the pimp.
The brutal pimp, who snatched Tracy out of the Ralph's apartment or condo or whatever, and dragged her out to the car, beat her up, threatened her, and owned her for the $3,000 in orthodentures that she has.
Yeah.
So Silvio, season 3. Any thoughts you guys want to get out? That's my takeaway of Silvio. Is he remains one of Tony's most stable and loyal guys, but we saw a little bit something different here.
Yes. Well, he remains that stable guy, and that darkness that you mentioned about University plays in contrast to what so often is done with Silvio, which is that he's played for laughs.
Yeah.
And he's still a funny character. Mm-hmm. Still got those bits, but those moments in University are unforgettable.
Yeah. And finally, Paulie. Can't forget about old Winghead here. He's Paulie. Nothing's. This is one of those guys that he personally, as far as his personality and his view on life, not likely to change anytime soon. But he has an interesting situation going on within the family now. And he's not doing too well with Ralphie's rise and Ralphie's success. Paulie's been around a long time. He goes back to Tony's dad, that era. And here comes along Ralphie. And Paulie is having his struggles with Christopher on one hand. And also now Ralphie is a top earner. And he's making overtures to the New York family. That's a problem.
Paulie is very low rent this season. Paulie has low status this season. And it's interesting to see that character in a lower status position. Not that he's ever been particularly high status, but he was higher formerly. Certainly before Ralphie came along, before Christopher started fucking up, all this stuff. I love the way it's played. And I think it's really interesting because you get to see that I enjoy when Paulie is using his low cunning, right, to try to see where he can maybe advance himself a bit. He really falls to pieces after the decision goes against him for Ralph and the codes for the safes and all that stuff, and it never really improves. He just continues to find ways to feel insulted.
Yeah. Paulie's a piece of shit. He's a huge fucking asshole.
Yeah.
Tony Sirico is so brilliant in portraying the weird, intricate aspects of this character. Scene where he sniffs Adriana's panties.
He's a strange guy.
He's very strange. The bit, remember at the beginning, so many funny things happen as Pine Barrens goes on, particularly with how undignified it is what the gangsters have to do, and it starts with him being primped like he's getting like a Manny.
I'll go with the satin finish.
The satin finish, it's so funny. He's great. And
I lost my shoe. And his shining moment has to be Pine Barrens this season.
It's gotta be. He's got he has me on the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think, as funny as a lot of those things are, it's got to be clear at the end of the season that this is not good, right? Whatever else that could be the import of this little short 2-minute scene with Johnny Sack outside Vesuvio, not good.
Yeah. Yep, not good for anybody. Mm-hmm. I think it's time for our next top 3.
Top 3.
There we go. That was ugly. Great. All right, we're back on track.
Back to basics.
We're going to do moments. Top 3 moments. This is right up there with quotes for one of the hardest categories, to pick 3 moments out of the season.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, what are you going to do?
But, yeah, exactly. What are you going to do? Jordan, start us off.
So my number 3 comes from Second Opinion. It's really the entire scene, but it is specifically Dr. Krakauer with Carmela, specifically when he says the line to her, "You can't say you've never been told."
What Jordan just said is my honorable mention. Particularly the scene, but particularly that tag. I think that's the end of the scene.
That's the end of the scene. Yep.
Yeah. Number 3 moment. Proshai Livushka. Tony tells off Noah and then passes out. This scene, some people like it. Some people really were not happy when this happened. I think I get why, but also I do think it's funny. I think it's gutsy, and I think making fun of Tony's parochialism and how he's effectively a yuppie, I think also points to something in where the show will go moving forward, and how they will be, how they'll have fun with the characters and be very inventive and even ambitious in their depiction of them going on. I still think it's a funny scene watching it all these years later, so that's why I chose it.
Great. My number 3 is Patsy Parisi with Gloria Trillo in Amor Fu, visiting her in the car.
That's my number 2. Yep.
Which is very funny that's your number 2. We'll talk about it in a second, but go on. So your number 2 is that exact moment.
It's that moment with this quote. "If you talk to or go anywhere near him or his family, they'll be scraping your nipples off these fine leather seats. And here's the point to remember. My face will be the last one you see, not Tony's. It won't be cinematic."
Yeah. It's great. Great line.
Wow. Yep.
Your number 2, Paul?
No. That's my number 2.
This is so
Melfi at the end of Employee of the Month.
Well, I think this speaks to the power of the moments. We all have a lot of crossover here. My number 2 is Dr. Krakauer. One thing you can never say that you haven't been told.
My number 1 that I feel might get repeated, it's Amor Fu. It's the final fight between Gloria and Tony. "I didn't just meet you. I've known you my whole fucking life."
Yep. That's my number 1. Poor you and Morfu.
Yeah.
My number 1 is end of Employee of the Month.
Yeah,
so there we go.
This. We just traded all.
No, yeah.
These are all so boring. These moments.
Well, but it speaks to the power of these moments that these are obviously very big.
And these are
moments.
all acted with the top standard of acting professionalism. It's some of the best acting I've ever seen in movies or television.
Yeah.
The pain in James Gandolfini's face. "I didn't just meet you. I've known you my whole fucking life."
Yeah.
I'm going to start crying if I try to emulate his voice in that moment.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And the realization on his face, the look like he's glimpsed the unthinkable. You know, it's with a level of Greek tragedy almost.
Yes.
Like realizing you're my mother.
Yeah, it's mythological. It's.
And then he almost kills her. It's yeah.
Oh yeah. When he's choking her and she's just saying, "Kill me, kill me," spits in his face.
Unbelievable. What a crazy good scene.
Brutal. Unforgettable.
The actor who plays Dr. Krakauer is this guy named Sully Boyer. He died after they filmed it, before it was aired. I don't think he ever saw the episode.
Sorry to hear that.
Which is kind of stunning because it's a really, clearly a memorable moment.
Yeah.
He was in Dog Day Afternoon, one of my favorite movies years ago.
Great movie.
He played the bank president. He was more heavy set.
Oh my God! Yeah, that was him.
I wish to fuck you never came in this bank. That guy. And I think it's such an interesting moment, and it's so interesting that it's a hugely impactful moment, as Jordan was saying, like the other ones, with such good acting. In that case, some of it coming from a guy that we have not seen before, that we never see again. It's a one-off, that scene.
Yeah.
And he's so blunt And he's almost, not quite, but almost hard to understand. Like, the way he speaks, he's just so quiet and clinical and older. But that's what makes it so good. There's just zero bullshit to it.
Zero bullshit. In a show that's about liars.
Correct.
And people that lie, it's like a shining beacon of truth that comes through.
Well, and you want to talk...
That might be it. That might be why it...
Yes. Yeah. And you want... Exactly. It's a rare moment of ray of truth. And you want to talk about things that stand out in this world.
Sure.
It even caused... It stood out so much in this universe that it caused Carmela to stay for the rest of the hour. I won't take your money. Who in this show says that sentence?
Yeah. Sure.
Please.
He's the antithesis of everyone on this show.
Yeah. And it's great because he's a doctor and he writes out perhaps the only prescription that might help Tony, which is if he were to, sit in his jail cell, read Crime and Punishment every day for, 13 years, then he might be redeemed. But he's not going to reflect. He's not going to be
Which
punished.
is what Leota's character in Many Saints of Newark is doing.
Yeah. So, yeah, great moment, and it's great for the reasons we just illustrated. I love this moment.
Yeah.
And Employee of the Month, we've been over that. We talked about Milfy
of course,
and that moment and what it means. So we don't need to do another deep dive on that. But
little,
the power of that last moment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
And the fact that all of it is in her eyes. Her face doesn't move for that last shot, but you see in her fucking eyeballs. Am I going to do it? Am I going to do it? I'm not going to do it. No. The words gets out, and she's committed. It's
poetry. It's
why you watch drama for moments like that.
Give it up for Patsy Parisi, everybody.
Yeah,
that fucking scene is stone cold from a guy that's like one of the nice guys on the show, like guy you don't send. Like, that's perfect.
From the guy that we felt bad for at the beginning of the season.
Right.
And he had a funny scene where he pissed in Tony's pool.
He's almost buffoonish.
Yeah.
He Tony has to kick him out at the end of season 2 with the coat, and Patsy brings the fur coat, and he's peeing in the pool, and he's crying, and it's
right.
He's hilarious,
and he's the least like a movie star gangster. This is the guy you send to deliver that.
Oh
you
yeah,
know?
He's
you want a beautiful death? It's gonna be me. It's not gonna be
no
Tony.
knock on Dan Grimaldi, but that's not a glamorous looking man,
right? Nor would he claim to be. So he would not take that as an insult.
Right,
exactly. He plays that character very well.
Yeah. In that sense, he's actually quite believable as a North Jersey wise guy.
I was going to say, on site, and just any scene with him, you're like, yeah, I would believe this man in real life as a guy that worked for the mob in real life.
Yeah. You look at actual mob mugshots of modern day gangsters, they're not pretty guys. You know what I mean?
We all clearly agree that poor you, I didn't just meet you, I've known you my whole life, is this hugely important moment.
Huge.
But also that in choosing this moment where Patsy comes in, it highlights something else that's important, that Tony had to do that, right? Because any attempt to deliver this message himself would have just given Gloria too much of what she wanted.
Yeah.
Right. He's given her too much ammunition already.
When he gets what it is he needs to do, it's a brilliant solution. I hate to say it because it's so cruel and it's terrible, and the things he's saying are very calloused and gangstery, and he delivers it perfectly. But this is the way out of it for Tony, other than killing her or accepting responsibility for it. So, yeah, hell of a moment, hell of a scene. It remains one of my favorites. So, good. Here's something we're gonna do different this retrospective. I want to dip a little bit into some listener messages that we've gotten.
Oh boy,
this is.
I'm sure they're all very nice.
Yeah, they are.
Go fuck yourselves. No.
Yeah, we haven't.
Basically.
Well, we're at the point now. We have developed a loyal, wonderful audience that we're incredibly grateful for. To all of you who are still with us at this point, thank you so much. Thank you for the positive reviews on iTunes and whatever. We have way more. I mean,
I'm humbled by the number of listeners we have. Thank you all for listening so much. I mean that so authentically. Thank you.
Jordan, you said on your personal Facebook that I won't give out the information to.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
that more people have listened to you talk about Gabagool than maybe anything else.
More people have heard me talk. Famously, yes.
And this is an articulate, amazing teacher, human being,
go on,
writer, storyteller. So I am thrilled that we're all still doing this.
I'm thrilled to be talking about Gabagool once again.
Oh, this from a slice of gabagool?
I'm not doing these in any particular order. I just picked out a handful of them here, but we have this from Sarah in Australia. This is a little bit while back. This was late 2021 we got this. Hello, my partner and I are just at the end of season 1. We're listening to your podcast with every episode, and we absolutely love it. We do Sopranos night every Sunday. It's the highlight of our week, helping us get through lockdown in Australia. I wanted to mention that. She did ask here if we were coming back because we were on a little bit of a hiatus at that point. So she was like, are new episodes coming? Because I noticed there haven't been any new ones for a little bit. I responded and let her know that there were, but thanks so much for the podcast. So Sarah, on behalf of the three of us...
Yeah, Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Listen, I'm not going to comment on the political aspect of COVID and the lockdowns. And also, honestly, as an American, I think too many Americans on either side of the aisle are running their mouth about the situation in Australia, and it's not their business to do so. But I will say that wherever you are in the world, if you're dealing with these lockdowns and this awful COVID business is just depressing and terrible for everybody. So Sarah, I'm so happy that our show has been able to be a light for you in these times. It's been a light for us as well.
Absolutely. We hope you're safe. We hope you're healthy and that you're hopefully still listening.
Yeah,
Definitely.
please. Thank you, Sarah.
And Sarah, you're not alone. As I understand it, the lockdown around COVID was a time frame in which a lot of people revisited a lot of TV shows, and it's given The Sopranos kind of the second life among younger millennials.
There is a revival.
There was a New York Times article about this, wasn't there? That
like
millennials are discovering The Sopranos for the first time.
The numbers were coming in from HBO Max, and they're like, one of our most watched shows is not new content. It's The Sopranos again.
Yeah. So thank you, Sarah. Good luck. Stay healthy, and we appreciate the email. This next one is... I have to mention a few things about the name and the subject line before we get to the content of the email. The name on the subject line is Alapan, but it's signed at the bottom with Alan. So I don't know what that's about. I never heard of the name Alapan, but
Okay.
Alapan. And the subject of the email is Grump Fest.
Yes. That's
This was sent in after our Feel Bad Ending episode. Proshailovishka,
of course. Yeah, this was my fault. All right.
Well, I'm going to let you get first response then when we get through this.
Yep.
Hi, guys. I am an English fellow living in the Netherlands who has been following your podcast for a while now. Thus far, I have found it nicely stimulating, and you are kind of good company, which is the crucial aspect when sticking with a podcast. So it has prompted me to suddenly get in touch. Well, this week, I gotta say, for once, you are very much not good company.
Oh, man.
The constant whining about this episode's content became very dreary, repetitive, and kind of childishly petulant. This episode is pivotal.
And shallow and pedantic.
This episode is pivotal. Basically, the series could have ended there, because Tony's dysfunctional relationship with his mother is the show. Chase uses the series to replay his relationship with his own mother. Naturally, he wrote this episode, and one can assume that he worked especially hard on it. That is why it is particularly fascinating, rich in tone, and so emotionally charged. To avoid it or grumble about its lack of shenanigans is sidestepping the deep melancholy inherent in the motor behind the creation of the show. Everyone in the series is sad, unfulfilled, and lacking the love they desire. The fact that we are also especially invested in this show means that we must recognize this and ask ourselves why. I got the impression this episode was maybe too close to home, that you collectively colluded in avoiding the real reason the show intrigued you so much. The shenanigans are merely connecting tissue, let's face it. Am I being too harsh? Yours, Alan, and I won't give his last name. By the way, referring to Noah, the fictional characters that annoy us and appall us the most are often the ones holding a mirror up to something we do not like about ourselves. Woof, that's loaded. That's a loaded email.
Alan, so first of all, let me say thank you for listening.
Yes.
And even if you are maybe having a tough time with one of our episodes, we still count that as awesome engagement. So thank you so much for listening. I will take the hit on this one. I have listened back to that episode since receiving this message. I am certainly the biggest whiner. I'm also the person that likes that episode the least. In fact, I don't really like Proshai Lavushka. I think it's a wonderful episode of television that I don't want to watch again. But I'm not going to start complaining about it because that is what you are, in fact, complaining about. I think your complaints are totally valid. It's a really dreary, repetitive episode, and especially me, I keep saying the same thing over and over again in that episode. So, Alan, good catch, absolutely. I don't think we gave that episode maybe as fair a shake as we should have, particularly me. I don't think I gave that episode as fair a shake as I ought to have, and I think you're right. I think in a show that was structured with Tony versus Livia, it could have just ended, and it's brave that it went on, and it's done amazing stuff since, and that episode doesn't get enough credit for being the source of that. However, I resent any comparison to Noah Tenenbaum, and I will not accept that.
That we reject flatly.
That we reject flatly.
And you can keep that sentiment in the Netherlands. We don't want it.
That's right. But listen, you know what? Yes. Is Noah a pretentious film analyst? Yes. Are we pretentious television analysts? Sure. Okay, we'll give it to you a little bit. But you know what? More than anything, hey, thanks for listening.
Yes, that's the core point. Whether you like us, don't like us, agree with us, don't agree with us, thank you, Alan, for tuning in with us.
And enjoy the fact that your royal overlords are a frail old woman and a tiny baby.
Wow.
Shots fired.
Damn.
Shots fired, Alan, in a friendly way. Thank you for listening.
Yes, Alan, thank you for listening. And I'll just briefly say, I do think that the stuff that we talked about with Proshai Lavushka, the feel bad ending, I definitely communed with, but I've always had a pretty big soft spot for that episode, both because of some of the fearless stuff they do in the depiction of Livia's death and the opening sequence with Noah. So.
Very true. And I won't get into it because I actually gave Alan a pretty lengthy response when he emailed us, but I did just mention to him briefly that I thanked him for listening, and because we do appreciate every one of you, whether you like what we say or not. I mentioned that we were referring more to just not the fact that it was a bad episode, but the tone was unpleasant. It's not one that you just want to live in.
Stop.
And
He's going to get mad at us
But
again because we're complaining about it again. We can't let this become another Proshai Lavushka episode.
correct.
We did it already.
But I will. But the reason I mentioned it was because he did give me one last response, because it is another point that he made here.
Oh, boy. Okay.
He said, "Hey, thank you for responding. Fear not, I'm planning to stick with you right through to the end. Meanwhile, feel free to use my input in a future episode. It would be an honor." Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Alan.
Now it's my turn to grumble. He hasn't grumbled enough.
All right.
2 weeks between episodes. Come on, chaps.
Oh, boy. Actually, that's we talked about that when we first set up this podcast, where it's just like, because that's the thing. Do you go weekly? Do you go every other week?
Yeah.
Which is the schedule for a lot of podcasts, by the way. Or do you do it basically whenever you have time? I actually loyally follow 3 or 4 podcasts that just release episodes sort of whenever, which is a little frustrating.
Yeah.
Bi-weekly is because, Alan, it's just we got busy. This was a project that started for us in the pandemic as something to really engage with a piece of art that we felt strongly about. And we were initially able to really record a lot, and then life kind of came roaring back kind of irregularly at first and then more persistently, and we just felt the easiest way that we could get content out to you folks reliably was every other week, because if we promised you every week, it wasn't going to happen.
That's exactly, Jordan nailed that. Thank you, Jordan, for saying that. I've described it before as the little podcast that could, in that, this is at least, maybe not Jordan, but this is my first time ever doing a podcast. I think it's Paul's as well.
Absolutely.
So this is...
I've done lots.
Jordan has more podcasting experience. But look, it's not only that, it's that we started out with nothing, no budget. This is just us wanting to talk and see what we could do. Turns out we've gained a decent following, but consistency is more important to me than trying to do something I'm not able to do. And because this is a podcast that we started from scratch, it's not something I could do full-time or professionally, and we do it all ourselves. I edit every episode myself, all of the sound work. And we also have conflicting schedules. I'm an artist. I have an eclectic schedule. Paul does his thing with his own work schedule, and Jordan's a teacher. So to make it work, I would rather do one episode every 2 weeks than make once a week work, which I could do some weeks and then other weeks. I'd rather have a consistent every 2 weeks than an inconsistent weekly, if that makes sense.
It sure does.
You hit the nail on the head. We're going to do another one here. This one is very long. I'm not going to read the whole thing.
Okay. Excerpts.
But this one is from Brent.
Brent.
Chris, Paul, and Jordan, my name is Brent, and I live in Boston. Hey, your hometown, Paul.
All
There
right.
you go. I just started rewatching The Sopranos for the third time. To complement the viewing, I wanted to find a podcast that analyzed each episode. After considering several podcasts, I settled on yours because it's much more thoughtful and deep than all the others. Thank you, Brent.
Thanks, Brent.
Thank you for that. Listening to you all discuss each episode is like being in a college course. I mean that as a compliment and a real enhancement to the experience. He's referencing now in this next paragraph that he listens to our discussion in the episode where we covered college, the season 1 episode
Oh, yeah.
of college.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there was something interesting he felt compelled to email about. He says, during your discussion, there were 2 mentions of the strangely large gun that Fred is carrying around.
Oh,
being
yes.
stuck to it.
Yep,
we
sure.
commented on how it was comical.
I remember that, yeah.
It reminded me of like the 89 Batman when Joker just pulls that ridiculous gun out of his pants.
Right.
But anyway, he has some insight on this. I grew up target shooting, and I'm actually familiar with the gun Fred was holding. He's using a Ruger Mark IV with a 10-inch barrel. What's interesting about this gun? 22 caliber gun that is used almost exclusively for shooting targets and is widely considered a gun for kids to learn with.
Huh.
The extra long barrel provides stability and accuracy. The bullet itself is very small and the velocity of the round is low. This is a gun that is not suited to killing. In fact, when not at close range, 22 caliber bullets have been known to ricochet off an individual's thick skull or even be stopped by heavy or thick clothing. Don't get me wrong, it certainly can kill a person, but that said, I seriously doubt any gangster would select such a weapon for anything. As you all have noted throughout your podcast, this is a show that does not overlook details, and this strange-looking gun was noticed. So what's the reason that Fred is using such a weapon? It's almost as if Fred was never much of a gangster. Or perhaps Fred lost that part of him permanently. When Tony comes back into his life, he grabs himself a cartoonish child's gun and tries to shoot Tony, but can't. He tries to compel someone else to kill Tony, and can't. And ultimately, the large and lumbering Tony is able to sneak up and put a wire around his neck, while in the dead quiet Maine woods, and when Fred is on high alert looking for an intruder. Fred is looking to be an incompetent gangster. It's almost unfair that Tony is targeting this soft has-been. Anyway, thought that was worth sharing. Thanks for the outstanding podcast. Looking forward to the rest.
Brent, you're hired. Brent, you're the new 4th host.
Let me tell you something. You come out to Jersey, Brent. I'm dead serious. You come out to Jersey, we'll put you on this once because that is the kind of detail. You seem like a very smart guy. That's a very detailed breakdown.
Yeah, that was eloquent, and I agree with his interpretation. Actually, I never even now having that knowledge about the gun. That sounds totally right.
Brent, that was wicked good.
Yeah, and you and Paul can talk about all the dumb shit you can do up there in Boston.
Yeah.
No offense, we love our Boston.
We love
Go in
Boston.
the woods, friggin' like do target practice with this Ruger.
I want everyone to know that I talk a lot of shit about Boston, and I didn't mean to sound denigrating there. My wife is from the Massachusetts, Worcester, Boston area, so I don't have any actual grudge against Boston people. But when we're going to talk shit because I'm a New Yorker by blood.
That's right.
Lastly here...
Wow, we have a lot of those.
I'm telling you, dude, we have fans.
Okay.
All right, Brian from Massachusetts writes in response to our Employee of the Month episode. Hello.
Hi, Brian.
First of all, an excellent episode with a lot of fantastic insight as always. A couple things I was talking about with Lily, my wife, and we'll explain how this guy knows the show in a moment, about that are still etched into my brain. If Dr. Melfi did notify Tony that she would be seeking revenge, not justice, that's an important distinction that he felt compelled to make there.
Yeah, okay.
This is also an interesting window into how a blight like the mafia organized crime gets itself embedded in culture. Who do people go to when justice isn't achieved? It's easy to go down the slippery slope of saying this guy got away with it and the only way to stop it is by going to the mob who will get you revenge. But at what cost?
Yeah.
Good point, Brian. Thank you for emailing the show. That's actually my brother-in-law. Brian's my brother-in-law.
Oh, there we go.
Hey, Brian.
It's Lily's brother.
Oh, I love that.
And he does help our pod. He's a big fan and supporter of the podcast. Always retweets us, but he also helps me out a little bit on the technical end of it. So thank you for that email, Brian. I'm glad I was able to read that for you. Just making a point and a distinction there. I have nothing to add to it. Thank you for contributing.
I think I do actually.
Please.
Brian, what you just mentioned really reminds me of this. I read Trevor Noah's autobiography, which is called Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood. It's got a particularly good segment about how a certain level of crime is sort of allowed to exist in South Africa, particularly during the fall of the apartheid era. And the way Trevor Noah phrases this is, it's because crime cares, right? When the government is failing to provide food, services, when the police refuse to help you to seek justice for something that has been done that is wrong to you, when you feel like you have no one to turn to, you can always turn to crime, right? Mm-hmm. And The Sopranos does this so well multiple times, throughout the series so far even, where we see people in desperate situations and their desperation is avenged by the mob. And we feel really vindicated when that happens. And I think you're right. I think that is so much so how they become part of a community, is because they do the services that no one else will, and they care when others may not.
So a couple things. One is that, unlike Boca, I think I mentioned this when we recorded on Employee of the Month, unlike Boca, in which the gangsters are aware that a violation has taken place, here they're never aware, because Melfi never mentions it.
Right.
So instead, we see what the gangsters actually do day to day, which is not help anybody except themselves. They don't help the community. They bleed the community, and they take what they want, typically by force. So there's that. I think also, people get it. They understand the lore of revenge. You guys seen Sweeney Todd? I mean, come on. Rest in peace, Sondheim. And it makes it, I think, even more admirable, frankly, that Melfi understands, among many things, what the allure is of telling Tony, what the attraction to revenge is, and for her to still say no, for her to still refuse, again, just skyrocketed my respect and affection for her.
For sure.
Yeah. Well said, guys. I'm going to conclude the listener mail segment for now, but I want to bring this back. I had a lot of fun doing this with you guys. And we like engaging with our audience. So if you want your emails or letters or messages read on our next retrospective, email us at TheSopranosPodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on any of our social media pages. That's The Sopranos Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and at Sopranos Podcast on Twitter. And please hit us up. Let us know what you think about anything. We will read it if it's interesting, and so. Thank you to those of you who wrote in and continue to engage with us. Send us a message. Send us your thoughts on any episode, anything we've covered. Just honor our no spoilers policy. If you write about something that happened in season 6, we're not going to talk about it till we get there. But thank you so much for listening to all of you. This segment is brought in appreciation of all of you for bringing us to where we are. This is officially a successful podcast, and we have only our listeners and the great geniuses behind The Sopranos to thank for that. And with that said, it's time for our final top 3.
Final top 3.
It's the final top 3.
Oh, you're violating some copyright there now. Okay, careful.
Dear. Oh my.
Rock and roll.
Who started? Who's up?
Whoever you want, man.
I'll start. My number 3. To save us all from Satan's power.
Nice. Honorable mention. Employee of the Month. It didn't make top 3 for me. We'll talk about it. My number 3 is University.
Quick honorable mentions. Employee of the Month, Fortunate Son, and are you listening, Alan? Pro Shiley Bushka. Number 3, Pine Barrens.
You guys gave honorable mentions, so I'll drop mine. University would be my honorable mention, so I'm with you on that. So, yeah. My number 2, Amor Fu.
Number 2, Pine Barrens.
Number 2, University.
Number 1, Employee of the Month.
Number 1, Amor Fu.
Number 1, Amor Fu.
All right.
So it's the same 5 episodes in all of our top 3 and honorable
I
mentions.
think
right?
so. It's
Save us all from
so we
Satan's
got to
Power.
talk about Save Us All from Satan's Power. We got to talk about More Food. We got to talk about Employee of the Month
And University.
and University. Those are
Okay.
those are the ones that cracked the
These are
conversation.
huge episodes.
And Pine Barrens. You said Pine
And Pine Barrens, I'm
Barrens
sorry.
was your-
Okay.
And Pine Barrens was my 3.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Was there any one of those that only made an honorable mention? No. So it doesn't actually matter what order we go in then, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we start with University?
Great.
University was an episode that I had seen originally, because not all of season 3 was part of something I had seen when it originally aired. A lot of this is new for me. I have remembered University for years now. It's been 20 years since that episode aired, and it's haunted me. Not only is it the grand reveal of who Ralphie Cifaretto really is, the monster behind the mask, but it is just this really close look at Tony starting to realize some of the business that he's in and seeing this girl, Tracy, as a person, and there is this horrible, beauty in that realization. And I really love the actor that plays Tracy. I think she's wonderful and perfectly cast. I am nauseated by the scene in which she dies, but I think the episode is really important. I really enjoy and I like having conversations about the juxtaposition between the girls that work in the Bing and what their lives are like, particularly Tracy, and how we seem to devalue them, but we will value someone like Meadow, who is similar in age and just born under different circumstances. I felt University was an important episode,
Very much.
and I thought as a kind of a continuation to College, it was another one of those episodes where it was just this is an episode you talk about in isolation as a piece that is really meaningful.
I agree. And the thing about University that does it for me too, as an honorable mention, and could have easily been in my top 3 if the winds were blowing in a different direction, is that a great piece of art, an episode of something, a movie, a painting, whatever, provokes questions and provokes discussion. What I love about University is not only that it is a stone cold, brutal reminder of who these men are and the way that they behave, and not letting you fall too in love with them, because that's important to do. It provoked one of my favorite discussions on our podcast to date, which is, where is the line for these guys for when a woman is a wife or a daughter, someone to be respected and protected and held in close quarters and not dishonored, right, versus, well, she was just a whore, she's property.
Right.
And where does that line happen? How is that formation, how is that calculus considered? Mm-hmm. Where is that? And that's fascinating subject matter. It was one of my favorite discussions we had. So for that reason, University is a brilliant piece of art, and it's powerful, and it's well told.
Yeah, I think it's a step for the show. As Jordan said, it's a horrible beauty that imbues the episode with this power, and I think I can't say it any better than you guys did. It was something that was very challenging. It was not always pleasant. So, I chose it in my list, not necessarily because I'm rushing back to watch it, but because of how well executed it is, which is reflected in some other choices. The Kink song that I think is so perfectly utilized, a number of the sequences that are really well executed. But again, as I said at the top, they're consciously making these choices to show us some things that are not always pretty. Same would go for talking about Employee of the Month. It's this is not easy to watch, but it's not a fucking accident.
Yeah.
Actually, let's go ahead and transition then. Why don't we talk about Employee of the Month, the other very, very difficult episode this season?
Yeah, it was my number 1, so I'll take initiative again.
Please.
So someone else can start the conversation on the next one.
Sure.
But Employee of the Month was, you have to have balls to cover the subject matter, number 1. It's when you're dealing with something like a rape, you have to be cautious as artists, what you're saying, what you're depicting, how you're portraying it. And this one always goes back to my grandmother for me. And I may have mentioned this on the podcast. I don't remember, but if I did, it's a repeat story. I won't get into it.
You did mention it.
I did mention
yes.
it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's okay. Tell it again.
She's the kind of person who will shut off a movie if people are swearing and using vulgarities and behaving in immoral ways. And yet, even she noted the dignity and poise and skill with which this story was told, that she was able to appreciate that, speaks to the job they did telling this story. And whether or not you agree, there have been a lot of other shows, even on HBO since then, that have not perhaps covered the topic of rape as delicately and as precisely and as artistically as The Sopranos did. So it's tough. It's tough. And they nailed it. And not only did they nail it just because it's an episode that depicts a rape, they nailed the drama, the story of it. This woman, Dr. Melfi, who is she? Characters have interesting moments when their mettle is tested. It's easy to talk a big game, but when you actually are in that position where you have to make the decision and the chips are down, Melfi made the choice. And it's so powerful, her journey, the way she's interacting with the men around her, the emotional labor she has to carry in the aftermath of her own rape because the men around her are not making it better, is just beautiful.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I love it. Lorraine Bracco is a queen. This has to be a top episode for me. And I know it wasn't your number ones for this season. Amorphu is a masterpiece. It's my number 2. But it's this, if we do a series retrospective and we're talking about top 3 series episodes, this might be in my top 3. Just because for me, it's everything that The Sopranos is about. It's the morality of this life and the decisions you make with the power you have in it. And it's the best feature for Melfi possible.
Yeah. Chris, I can't do better than that. Yeah, thank you.
So what's next?
How about To Save Us All from Satan's
Great.
Power?
All right. Well, I was the only one to pick that, so I'll rant a little more. But this one's a much shorter explanation.
Well, I liked it too. It just didn't make a list for me.
Yeah. Oh, we all loved it.
Yeah.
As we record this, I'm getting ready to put that out next week. It's a little timeline there as far as when we record stuff. It's our next episode coming out, so I've been listening to it. So we all loved it. Interesting about To Save Us All from Satan's Power.
Great flashbacks.
Great flashbacks. Now, that's a
we
big
love
thing.
them.
Paul, I correct me if I'm wrong because you're here to defend yourself. Paul, as a general rule, is not a fan of the flashback.
Why is that? Like as a device, you mean?
As a general device.
On TV, it's used lazily. Flashbacks are too long, even on good shows.
Yeah. There are obviously exceptions because when they work, they're good, and they work here. Another thing The Sopranos does that could suck but doesn't are these flashbacks. I enjoy the context. A good flashback, especially this far into a story, should enhance what comes before, and this accomplishes that. It gives you more time with some characters you maybe wanted more time of. Jackie Aprile looms so large because of the importance of Tony and Jackie Jr.'s relationship this season. It's nice that we got a little bit more of Jackie Aprile Sr. and got to see it. And it was cool to see The Sopranos in another time period, sitting there, and the way they did it, the way they showed you when it was by framing it around the OJ trial was such a brilliant little touch.
Yep.
And again, the cycles of hypocrisy that are displayed, Junior's having a sit-down for hijacking some trucks that he shouldn't have been hijacking, which is what he was making a gripe about in season 1 with Christopher, the cycle of it, the hypocrisy of it, getting a few more minutes with Big Pussy, not as a ghost in a mirror, but seeing the tragic downfall of it all, that the whole time he was not what Tony thought him to be, at least the whole time we saw him as an audience member, and we came to love him and appreciate his presence on the show. But it was nice to get a few extra minutes with these characters who are no longer with us. And because they're no longer with us, it added a ghostly, wintry Tony on the docks with the snow around him, which evoked the snow and the imagery from Funhouse, was so cool to look at. And it added this ghostly, Ghost of Christmas Past, Scrooge kind of thing. That plus my personal Chris D'Amato bias for episodes of shows that are centered around events or holidays makes this a favorite for me in season 3.
I agree. I can't do better than you just did on the description of that. Those are all the reasons why I enjoyed this episode as well. I love the flashbacks in this one. I always want more from Jackie Sr.
Yeah.
Because his presence is so felt on the show, so getting that little flashback was helpful. And that flashback in particular, that one flashback in particular, really, it almost like retrofits the show with like more connective tissue between the seasons. It's just really nice. I like it a lot.
Yeah, there's like great fun ironies about the way that some of it's done. Like, by this point in the actual chronology of the show, Gigi's dead. Yeah. But Gigi's in one of the flashbacks as one of Junior's underlings. It's just great the way they put all that stuff together. One of my favorites is always the way that it all comes together. I think maybe by Satriali's Paulie and Silvio and Tony having an espresso talking about Big Pussy and talking about that betrayal. And of course they were the ones who disposed of him. And the scene is very funny, but it's painful as well. Yeah. So, not to mention the payoff in that episode. Some of the tags on these episodes in this season are nuts, and that's one of them. Yeah. When Meadow gives him the big mouth Billy Bass.
Yep.
Look, Gandolfini's face, his acting.
It's terrific.
Again, talk about good storytelling. You don't need him to say anything. So don't have him say anything. Except thanks, hon, and just have him stare. Out. You know?
Yep. That could have been another music moment, by the way. Take Me to the River.
It could have been. You know what? It's now been added. Okay. Pine Barrens.
Meh. Right?
Right.
So we should discuss this a bit because obviously it was one of our favorite episodes this season. Many people have said this is one of their favorite episodes of the series.
It is.
I've seen some articles that say this is the series' best episode. We talked about it a little bit on our Pine Barrens episode, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. We could revisit this again now. Where do you guys feel this stands in the canon of the whole series, since you guys are more sort of the series experts than I am?
I see why it's an easy pick for people's favorite. You have to remember, this is another thing, too, that I try to keep in mind when I rate art. The distinction between the words favorite and best.
Yes.
I see those as two different things.
They are.
There are things that I love that people think are trash. You know what I mean? And I think everybody has that. Everybody has that movie they love, or that show that no one else can stand, but you love it, right? Everyone has that thing.
Again, I love Congo. Congo's a bad movie.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go. Now, there are no
Mr. Amoka, stop eating my sesame cake. All right, I'll stop.
You know what I like is that, what's the middle? The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. I don't like that movie is fucking garbage.
This
Go ahead.
Podcast, you just got us so much hate
You just
by even bringing up Star Wars.
You just awakened something horrible. We can't say the Star Wars word on this show. I did it again.
Like, something horrible just happened. So many lives were snuffed out at once.
At least 70% of the assholes on the internet just tightened.
Yeah, the Force just awakened.
When you talk about Star Wars, you get a million.
All right, stop. Pine Barrens. So favorite versus best. It's
favorite versus
an episode
best.
you like, but you don't think it's the best.
I love Pine Barrens.
Yeah.
I think it's actually even artistically a great episode.
Yes, it's good.
I see why it's people's favorites. It's funny.
Yep.
It's perfectly illustrates what The Sopranos is about, which is this conflict between the two families. You have all this personal shit going on. Gloria situation is really escalating at home while Paulie, and then it's a new element. There's no other episode that looks like this. Two assholes stuck in the woods, and they're completely ill-equipped to deal with it, and they're completely outmatched, and there's mystery, and there's a lot there. They're trying to survive, and it's fucking funny. People love to laugh. It's funny. Pine Barrens is an objectively hilarious episode.
I loved it. It's a standout for the season. I don't know why necessarily a standout for the series. It was an easy pick for me this season. I really liked it a lot.
There's no other episode like it.
It's true.
I think
I was gonna say even if I were to do like a scoring of like the first 3 seasons, I don't think it would make a top 3 for me.
Really?
For seasons 1, 2, 3.
I agree with you.
don't know. Well, listen.
Yeah. It wasn't in my top 3.
We'll see at the end. I really like the episode a lot. I love that it's so much of Christopher and Paulie, who this season have been at each other's throats the entire time, so forcing them to work through their issues in this specific way is great. The stuff at home is great. The guy that plays the Russian is awesome, and those scenes with him, however brief, are terrific. I like that the narrative structure of Pine Barrens is kind of like, you're lost in the woods. All these characters are kind of at odds with themselves. They don't know how to move forward. You have to find your way out of the woods. I mean, there's no clearer metaphor for feeling lost in life than being lost in the woods. That's how it's literally used in literature. So I think that lines up well. I think Steve Buscemi does a hell of a job directing this episode. It's awesome. And you get a little bit of almost like a Samuel Beckett-ness to what's going on with Chris and Paulie in the woods. And it's cool to bring high art down to people who will just think, oh, this is funny, and not, oh, this is, meaningful in an existential way.
Yeah, well said. Like, waiting for Gavones. So, like...
That's a way better title.
I think that, Pine Barrens, one of the things about it, I couldn't describe a typical Sopranos episode, because there isn't a typical Sopranos episode. That's one of the things about it. That said, like, it's not as good as College, but like College, it's got one storyline that is an isolated incident. And The Sopranos does do that well.
That's a great point, Paul. I don't want to cut you off, but this is an episode that you could, in theory, show someone who's never seen it.
Yep.
And they not only would enjoy it, but it would get them interested in the show.
Yep.
Like I can't imagine somebody being sat down to watch Pine Barrens having never seen a Sopranos episode and not wanting to say, "Oh, I want to watch." Where's this on HBO?
You basically could watch just that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason I chose it, I put it. I think it's like third on my. Yeah, it's 3 on my list. Is that I think it's distinctive. It was distinctive for me in this season. It is a lot of fun. It's also my favorite storyline in the season is not paying off here, but it is ratcheting up quick, because the other stuff we've been sort of humming along with Gloria, like something's up with her, but Tony doesn't see it.
Yeah,
that's the sticking point, right? Like, and so here he's like, whoa, he can't sidestep it anymore. So there's that, and also him balancing it all. It's a great episode, the way it all comes together. And even though there's very serious things, as we've talked about, because we've had quotes from it and moments from it, it's a really funny episode.
Yeah. All right, which just leaves
Amor Fu. Which
Boring.
we've talked a lot about because we have a lot of lines and moments from. But what do you want to say about Amor Fu as a whole episode?
Paul,
It's obviously
why don't you lead?
All I wanted to say is thank you, Frank Renzulli, for your contribution to the show. This was his last episode.
And what a loss, because I've so enjoyed his work.
His episodes are always very good.
Am I allowed to ask why he left? Do we know why?
I don't know. I don't know that we know why. I don't know that that's out there. Maybe I'll look into it. But yeah,
I don't know. He was just such a presence. Paul, do you want to lead us on Amor Fu?
Yes, this episode is the payoff of one of my favorite storylines ever. It might be my favorite episode of the series. I just love the way all this comes together. Even each individual beat. I love that Gloria surprises Tony in the garage, in the underground garage. And that's like where Melfi got attacked and sexually assaulted. And it's becoming less and less clear who the danger is here. And then in that last scene with Tony and Gloria, it's one of the best scenes on The Sopranos, I think. Among the many things about it is that I actually feel like it forces me to confront both the fact that Gloria is dangerous, this is real, and Tony is, of course, dangerous, because Tony is fulfilling this fantasy that she seems to have. And also, I feel a little weird about Tony saying, "You're just like my fucking mother," even though she kind of is, because her reaction to it is also real. She's like, "Fine, burn me at the stake." It's very troubling. So is the storyline with Jackie. It's actually also quite a sad story, even though there are funny moments in it. So it all blazes at this point right near the end, when everything goes to shit. And it starts this process where the last 2 episodes both have bleakly comic moments, but are both pretty devastating, I think. So that's why it stands out for me. And in fact, I think I actually got to give a shout out. Another moment that stands out that we've already talked about is Patsy at the end. So, and the sequence with all the guys going home. I just think it comes together really well.
Yeah, I'll only add to that, which was beautiful, Paul. Thank you. I'll only add to that. I really enjoy the Jackie Jr. scenes, in particular the robbery that goes wrong, the death of Sunshine, the killing of Dino in the street by Christopher, which is one of Christopher's defining moments this season. Obviously, the A-plot is Tony and Gloria, and we've already really, really gone into why all those moments are terrific. I just, I'm rarely so compelled from minute 1 to the final shot of an episode the way I am with this one. And that final shot of just Patsy driving home with his groceries, or being asked to pick up groceries or whatever. No, with the groceries, I think, at that point. I love it. I love it. I was listening back to our episode on Amor Fu, and I had kind of asked, like, I don't really get the last shot. And you guys kind of, especially Paul, I think you kind of illuminated, like, well, even these guys get to go home. They have someone to go home to. And the implication being Gloria does not. She does not return to a state of normalcy at the end of the day, right? She's still out there in the wild and alone in her way, and that really resonates with me in so much of what this show tries to say about her and about these men. It's an incredible episode of television, and for me, normally my 1, 2, 3 are very close because the episodes are all of such good quality. For me, Amorphu is like several spots ahead of like a second place pick for me.
So Morpho is like a potential series best.
I think a potential series best of what I've seen.
I wouldn't argue with it.
Yeah.
Well said, guys. I have very little to add to that. We've talked a lot about it in various other subjects, so thank you for your articulation there. Season 3, that's a wrap, guys.
Hey!
Thank you all so much. Whether you view Season 6 as 1 or 2 seasons, we're basically close to the halfway point. We're excited to get into Season 4. Jordan has very little memory.
I remember nothing!
Of Season 4, or maybe didn't even watch most of it when
Possibly
it was happening.
not!
So I'm excited to have his fresh eyes on that, and I'm also excited to revisit it. It's one of those seasons that I appreciate more the older I get, and perhaps maybe didn't respect it enough when I first watched it as a very young man. It's one of those that really grows on you, I think. So I'm excited to cover it with these guys. We're excited to continue bringing this show to you. We ain't slowing down. We ain't stopping. We're going to keep going. And this has been a wonderful part of our year this past year. It's been a weird couple of years for the world, folks, but this has been a lovely go-to for us. And we also appreciate each and every one of you for helping us out. I know we've said that ad nauseum, but that's it. Thank you for Season 3. Is there anything else you guys want to say before we wrap up?
I just hope that the folks that have stuck with us this long will hang out for Season 4.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you guys so much for listening, and keep on listening.
Especially you, Alan.
Especially you, Alan. He might be like our one download in the Netherlands.
Right. He's holding the Netherlands down for us. That's his territory.
Yes, that's our Netherlands demographic we have to reach. Alan, thank you. Everyone else, thank you. We love you. We love The Sopranos. Season 4 coming at you. I don't think we're planning on taking a break, but if an episode is a week or two late after this, relax. I promise we're coming back. We're going through all 86 and some more. We have some other ideas to keep the show going. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm Chris D'Amato.
I'm Paul Mancini.
And I'm Jordan Hugh.
And I'm the spirit of Lily Goodman D'Amato. And we'll be back next time with Season 4. Thank you all.
Almost time for turkey sandwiches!